Hello. This week we're going to explore the parami of renunciation. And this is the third of the 10 paramis that we're exploring in this series. And you may recall that last time I talked about morality, and the time before that I talked about generosity. Those are the first and second of the paramis or perfections. And so today I'm going to build on that by talking about the third parami, which is renunciation. And usually we often think of renunciation as giving up things that we like and then suffering because we don't have them. So, for example, if I renounce eating chocolate, I may suffer because I really want to eat a chocolate bar. I'm craving a chocolate bar. But in Buddhism, renunciation isn't really about forcing ourselves to give things up. It's more about seeing what's getting in the way of living a spiritual life and then letting those things go because we value our spirituality more than the obstacles that get in its way. So renunciation is one of the paramis because it helps us to get unhooked from our cravings and our attachments, and therefore to advance on the spiritual path and be more at ease and more peaceful. And here is a Jataka tale about renunciation. You may remember that the Jataka tales are stories about the Buddha before he became the Buddha, while he was still in his previous lives working on becoming a Buddha. And this Jataka tale is about renunciation, and it's called The Virtue of Detachment from Worldly Concerns. And in this lifetime, the Buddha-to-be was born into a family of great reputation and wealth, who lived in comparative luxury and didn't want for anything. And the Buddha-to-be was renowned for his virtue, his good conduct, his scholarship, how loved he was by his family. He was esteemed by all the local townspeople. And he studied and so was regarded very well. And eventually his studies led him to think about living a simpler life instead of the luxurious life that he was used to. So after his parents died, he moved into the forest near a small village to live the rest of his life as a renunciate, as a simple person. And as a renunciate, the Buddha-to-be became known among the local people for his simple demeanor, his modesty, his kindness, and his selflessness. And because he wasn't interested in material possessions anymore, he became a skilled and respected teacher. And when the villagers became aware that he had in fact been born into a very wealthy family, their admiration for him grew even more because he had given it all up. And after a few years, a close friend of his dead father went to visit him. And his father's friend told him that he was ignoring his brothers and sisters, his aunts and uncles back in the town, as well as his responsibilities to have children to continue the family line. However, the Buddha-to-be did not succumb to his father's friends' pleas for him to return to civilization, saying that it was much more difficult to live according to the Dharma as a householder, as a family man, than it was as a renunciate. And he explained to his father's friend that the life of a family man is often in conflict with simplicity and peace, precisely because of all the worldly concerns that come with getting married and having a family. And the Buddha-to-be just didn't want to be engaged with the busyness and distraction of a family life. He wanted to continue being a renunciate. So he thanked his father's friend for his concern, but he stayed in the forest as a renunciate and lived happily for the rest of his life. So the moral of this story, of course, is that renunciation and living a simple and unencumbered life is much more conducive to contentment and happiness than a life filled with busyness and responsibilities and commitments. Renunciation isn't very popular today because it seems to be all about giving up things that make us happy. People don't want to do it because we think that things in the external world, whether they're material possessions or keeping busy, will make us happy. We live in, as one of my friends says, a more, better, faster society. You know, there's the new car or the latest electronic gadget or the dream vacation that we think will make us happy. But actually, the opposite is often true. The simpler our lives and the less we have and want, the happier we're likely to be. This is why renunciation is part of so many of the world's great faith traditions, including Buddhism. And in what's called the Great Renunciation, Prince Siddhartha, who was to become the Buddha, at age 29, Prince Siddhartha renounced his comfortable life in his father's palace to follow a spiritual path. And ever since then, Buddhist monks and nuns have committed themselves to a life of renunciation. Historically, Buddhist monks were only allowed 8 possessions. Their robes, and their robes consisted of 3 pieces of fabric, so that's 3 of the 8 right there. An alms bowl to beg for food with, a belt to hold up their robes, a water filter to filter water so that they had access to clean water, a needle to repair their robe, and a razor to shave their heads. So those were the only worldly items that Buddhist monks traditionally were allowed to own. And then, of course, there's celibacy on top of that. And even today, many orders of Buddhist nuns and monks are forbidden from handling money. So renunciation is easy to see in the life of Buddhist monastics and indeed in the lives of other monks and nuns. But the role of renunciation in the lives of lay people like us can be harder or more challenging to see. And can also be doesn't have to be as rigid as it is for monks and nuns. For example, for lay people, Buddhism doesn't require that we renounce having money, sex, or a closet full of clothes, and it doesn't require us to shave our heads, obviously, or to eat after noon. Yet renunciation is still a really important part of the Buddhist path for lay people, even though teachers in the West don't tend to talk about it very much, in my view. So let's explore a little bit more about what renunciation is and isn't. And I find it helpful to think of renunciation as letting go, of releasing, of freeing oneself. And interestingly, if you look it up in the dictionary says that renunciation is about abandoning a belief, an idea, or a course of action. So it's not necessarily just about material things. It's also about renouncing our beliefs, our ideas, and the ways we act, and maybe doing things differently. In other words, renunciation is an inside job. It's all about the mind, what happens in here. It certainly can mean giving up things in the external world, but at a deeper level, it's about giving up whatever doesn't serve us on the spiritual path anymore. Giving up whatever is between us and true, deep contentment. Whatever stands in the way of making progress on the path towards awakening. To be a little bit more specific, renunciation is about changing the way we relate to life. It may mean changing our lives or not, but it always means changing the way we relate to our lives, changing the way we experience ourselves and our lives. So it's not about having so many desires and attachments and not having so many things we dislike or want to get away from. It's about truly being in the present moment and accepting whatever happens, whether it feels pleasant or unpleasant. So it's really about reducing our desires and attachments and also not being so keen to either cling to things or crave things or push them away. This is renouncing our views and opinions, if you like. At its heart, renunciation is about understanding, I think, that everything arises and passes away. In other words, that everything is impermanent. And if everything is temporary and provisional, impermanent, then it just doesn't make sense to cling to anything or to try to escape anything. As Suzuki Roshi said, renunciation is not giving up things of this world, but accepting that they go away. I really like that. So this is not a common understanding of renunciation, because usually we see it as a way of forcing ourselves to deny our desires or cravings. But what he's saying is that it's really about accepting the impermanence of all things. Now, when renunciation does become a forcing or a denial, then it becomes a form of violence towards ourselves. Overzealous renunciation, I think, can blind us to our real needs or to healthy motivations to look after ourselves. It can also turn into self-deprivation and even extreme asceticism, so that we don't look after ourselves and we get sick. Even Prince Siddhartha, the yet-to-be Buddha, fell into this trap when he was trying to attain enlightenment. It's said that for a long time he ate only 1 grain of rice a day, that he drank his own urine, that he stood on 1 foot and slept on nails. That's a lot of forceful renunciation. And here's what the Buddha said about this afterwards, about this experience of such forceful self-deprivation. My body became extremely emaciated. My limbs became like the joined segments of a vine or bamboo stems. My spine stood out like a string of beads. My ribs jutted out like the jutting rafters of an old abandoned building. The gleam of my eyes appeared to be sunk deep in my eye sockets, like the gleam of water deep in a well. My scalp shriveled and withered like a green bitter gourd, shriveled and withered in the heat and the wind. And of course, this didn't work for the Buddha. He was no closer to awakening through all of this extreme deprivation. So renunciation shouldn't really be about forcing ourselves to give things up or depriving ourselves. Rather, it's working to renounce the mind states of clinging and aversion so that we can achieve freedom, and to see that letting go is worthwhile and possible. Strong feelings of craving or dislike, pushing away, aversion, often come with a compulsion that kind of justifies or excuses these mind states. So they're perfectly understandable. And also, sometimes we can feel that letting go or renunciation can be frightening because clinging gives us a sense of security or a sense of identity. We identify with our beliefs, with our possessions, with our habits, our ways of doing things. They become who we are, and so to let go of them can be pretty scary. And as a result, we might not know how to function in the world without these things, without these props. So there's no doubt that renunciation can be difficult. Not getting caught up in the craving and clinging can require a lot of determination and patience. But if we hang in, it can yield many, many benefits. And the first of these benefits of renunciation, I think, is the inner strength to overcome our compulsions and temptations that try to steer us away from the spiritual path. Because when we have renounced things, we know that we have the inner ability to surmount these difficulties and not to be driven by them, not to let ourselves get caught up in them. A second benefit of renunciation, I think, is that there comes a sense of freedom and spaciousness and lightness. One of my friends told me recently how free she felt after she'd given away most of her worldly possessions and simplified her life down to the absolute basics. A third benefit is that renunciation, I think, can help us feel much calmer and more relaxed. This is because clinging and aversion can both take a lot of our energy, and they can be really tiring. So when we renounce our clinging and our aversion, we feel more peaceful and tranquil. And sometimes when we renounce our old habits or beliefs or something, we can find ourselves with a lot of new energy, because the energy that we have been using to support and fuel our clinging and aversion is now free and available for more wholesome purposes. So I think renunciation can definitely bring a sense of lightness and spaciousness, as well as contentment and joy. One particularly important form of renunciation is about giving up beliefs and assumptions that are not helpful and prevent us from advancing on the spiritual path, as I've already mentioned. Especially beliefs and assumptions about ourselves. Beliefs such as, I'm not good enough, or I'm a bad person, as well as assumptions about the world itself. Giving up beliefs about ourselves and about the world can be a very challenging form of renunciation, because our beliefs are so deeply embedded in our minds. But it can be done if we're gentle and loving towards ourselves, and patient, of course. And it really can be done because we acquired these beliefs and assumptions from somewhere else, from our lives as children perhaps, from our parents, from our surroundings. We weren't born believing that we were inadequate or bad people. So because we weren't born with these beliefs, because we took them in from different places, we can renounce them and let them go. Maybe not all at once, but gradually over time and with patience. So renouncing our beliefs about ourselves as inadequate or bad people is a really important part of renunciation, and perhaps one of the most difficult parts. But I invite you to consider this and to see if it makes sense to you. So to wrap this up, renunciation offers the joy of freedom, freedom from clinging, freedom from aversion, freedom from attachments to beliefs, to experiences, to possessions, to all sorts of things. But this isn't about being hard on ourselves or forcing ourselves or ignoring our needs. It is about recognizing that happiness is an inside job and that it arises when we let go of our clinging and aversions to things in the external world, and also our beliefs about ourselves and others. Releasing the stories that we tell ourselves about how things should be or how we want things to be or about how things are, and simply being with them, being with things just as they are without adding anything else, is a profound form of renunciation. As Ajahn Chah, a teacher of many of today's insight meditation teachers, said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. And if you let go completely, you will have complete peace." So thank you for listening. I wish you well.